This is Talk with TAS, a radio experience hosted by Dr. Teresa A. Smith, a licensed counselor and professor focused on the transformative journeys of her guests and the lessons they've learned along the way. She's also an author, speaker, and nationally known social media personality. Join her now as she interviews newsmakers, artists, authors, and more. You will learn something new. This is Talk with TAS. Here's your host, Dr. Teresa A. Smith, also known as Dr. TAS.
I have Jacquelin Thomas, an award-winning, best-selling author with more than 85 published books. You've heard me, 85 published books. You may recognize her name as she's the author of the Jezebel series. You know that Jezebel, we know her. Her books, Jackie's books, have garnered several awards. She's including 2 Emmy Awards, a Romance and Color Reviewers Award, Reader's Choice Award, and the Atlanta Choice Award in the Religious and Spiritual category. Jacquelin's first book, can you imagine this? Her first book was made into a movie. The book was entitled Hidden Blessings, and of course, she was honored in Houston at the Black Film Festival for that piece of work. Now, I could go on and talk about her accolades, but I don't want you to miss any of the time that we're going to spend with Jackie today. So I'm just going to say, sit back, grab some iced tea or some other type of beverage. We're in the kitchen, and just hang on, because we're going to ride with Jackie and find out everything we can about writing. But maybe we'll find out some things also that you don't know about Jackie that you think, I can't believe that. She's got a devious mind, because she's an author. So Jackie, welcome to my kitchen. And how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. I am doing wonderful. How are you?
I am doing good, Jackie, but I'm just an aspiring writer. I'm working on maybe my 4th book, but
hey, you're no longer aspiring. You are an author. You need to own it.
Well, see how this is my coach, just in case you guys know, this is my writing coach, and she's already coaching me. She's telling me to own it, and she's right. So you guys own what you're doing too. You're right, Jackie. I'm no longer aspiring. I'm an author.
That's
now.
Right. You're an author.
But to have written more than 85 books, and you're still writing, and that drive is still there. How do you keep that drive going day after day?
I love writing. It is my passion. Growing up, I was really shy. And so writing was my outlet. I didn't really talk to people. I was just so shy. And I wasn't one for arguments and drama. If someone wanted to, I guess you would say they tried to bully me when I was little. The only difference is, even though I didn't talk, I would fight. And so, I'd let you talk. And when I got tired of you talking, I started every fight I was ever in. And that was because I didn't want to go, shut up, you're going to go make me. And then I'm going to just go on and punch and just cut out all the other stuff. And so I would just punch you in the face, and, then I'd get in trouble, but it didn't last very long, because people, word got around school pretty quick that even though I was very quiet, I wasn't timid, but, I was just really shy, but I would fight. So, if you come for me, I'm going to answer. And so, but see now, I've outgrown all of that. I now realize that when people have issues with me, it's their issue, not mine. You know what I'm saying? And so, not that I don't really have drama in my life right now anyway, thank goodness. But you know what I'm saying? There's usually, when people have issues like that, there's something going on at home. There's something wrong. There's something they're not happy about. And so we have to, if I could have a do-over, I probably wouldn't have talked, but I probably could have written a good letter to say, hey, I like you, peace and love, no fighting, I wish that I probably could have found another way to resolve those issues back then, but You're young, I've learned a lot since then, so I'm not so quick to punch these days, you know.
Now, you said if you could do a do-over, you would probably have written a letter. Now, do you draw inspiration for your work from, your childhood and just the situations that you encountered during that time?
Especially for my young adult novels, I do, because I think it's pretty universal. Times have changed. Kids now are so different from when I was a teen, but I think those main issues are still there. Where we go through that period of where we just don't like our moms not as much as we used to. We want to be grown. We want to make our own decisions. We think we know everything, and so I do draw on that because I did go through those periods. I
Mhm,
remember it, right? And I always wrote in journals.
mhm,
So I remember writing about my grandmother and how frustrated she made me and how she didn't love me because she wouldn't let me go to parties. She
mhm,
wouldn't let me, like, I never learned to ride a bike. I never learned to skate because my grandmother, number one, it wasn't ladylike. Number two, she was afraid that I would hurt myself.
mhm,
And so I learned, now having studied psychology, my grandmother taught me how to fear. It was learned behavior because she worried constantly about me getting hurt. And when I became a mother, I picked up those same traits and I worried about my kids to the point that my husband kind of had to sit me down and it's like, look, you got to let them be kids, you know? And so I
mhm,
had to learn to just trust God because He's the best security guard. He's the best security system. I just had to trust him. And, my grandmother was a Christian.
mhm,
She loved the Lord, but she was a chronic worrier and she was very protective of me. So I wasn't allowed to do a lot of things as a child, swim, any of those things, because she went to the worst case scenario.
mhm,
And, so for me, writing about it, I would write that I could do all those things. I would write about swimming in the water. I would write about riding a bike and running into a tree because I didn't know how to
mhm.
stop.
Yes.
I would write about those things and I would write about my frustrations and her not letting me do those things. And she read it one day and I saw the hurt on her face. And it just hurt my heart because I wasn't trying to hurt her feelings. Like I told her, I was trying, I needed to vent. I
Yes.
needed an outlet. And it did frustrate me. And she was like, I can't let you get hurt. I mean, I thought maybe after she read it, she would, go out and buy me a bike and, do all those things, some skates. No, no, that never happened. So I'm probably the only person in the world who doesn't know how to skate or ride a bike, but it is what it is. I'm okay with it. But my kids know how to ride a bike. My kids
Okay.
know how to skate. My kids swim.
Mhm,
I let them do the things I wasn't able to do. And there are times, when I think about getting on a bike and just going for it, then I remember I am 61. Um, I have two new knees. Therefore, I think I'm going to just, in my books.
yes. Yes. Yes.
Yes.
And that's a good point, Jackie. You can live vicariously through your characters and what
Yes.
characters you have. Now, for those who are aspiring writers, because I know some of these things because she is my writing coach. Um, where do your characters come from? I'm really thinking about the Jezebel series. Where do they keep coming from? Where do these people keep coming from?
Well, they come from everywhere because I people watch. I'm very observant. And I always, whenever, we're traveling or whatever, or whenever we're out, I may see a certain person and, I can kind of read emotions. And so it makes me wonder, what's going on with them? You know, why does she look so unhappy? Things like that. But with Jezebel, Jezebel was actually inspired by Jezebel in the Bible. And what happened, I was always intrigued by Queen Jezebel. mainly because I was looking for a scandal. Because in church, like I said, my grandmother was in church. She was the woman who walked around with the scarves and the blankets, the throws, shawls and the throws. And so if I were to go to church, like in this dress, first of all, she would never let me do that. But if I were to do that, she would have given me a shawl and pinned it. She had all these little pins. She would have made sure that shawl didn't fall.
Yes.
And if you had on a dress when you sat down that went above the knee, she would cover you. Mm-hmm. So later at home, she and my aunt would be talking. And my aunt, she was my great aunt because it was her sister. Mm-hmm. And they would be talking, and I would just be in the room because they always talked about all the good stuff. Yes. And I hear them talking about that Jezebel. So I knew enough that Jezebel was like a cheap woman. So I wanted to know about this cheap woman in the Bible. Mm-hmm. And it's a shame to say, well, I'm just going to be honest. I went to read about Queen Jezebel in the Bible because I wanted to know how trampy she was. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And, you know, God, I always say God has a sense of humor. He used my curiosity about this trampy woman to get me to read the Bible. And when I read about her, it was nothing like that. Mm-hmm. It was about a woman who was hungry for power. There was nothing in there about her being unfaithful to her husband or being a tramp. She was hungry for power. And later, as my faith grew and my studies increased in the Bible, I learned that it was more so that she had what they call a Jezebel spirit. And there's also a Ahab spirit. And they're commonly found in the church, which was interesting for me as well, because I was intrigued by Queen Jezebel and the fact that she could scare Elijah. I'm like, oh wow, she's tough. Yeah. She's tough. And like I said, I like women that are tough. I don't necessarily think I'm one of them, but that would be my alter ego, like this really bad, like crazy woman that isn't afraid to speak her mind, do whatever she wants to do. That's not me. I actually have manners, but sometimes you just want to kick those manners to the side and say, hey, this is the way it is. But I was intrigued by that. But at the time when I wrote the book, I wanted to write it not so much about her being a tramp, but more so, or her being, well, it was about her being power hungry, but I wanted to really shed light on the Jezebel spirit and how it's not just a female spirit. It can be a man, a man in the church can have a Jezebel spirit. Mm-hmm. Anyone that wants power and is willing to do whatever he has to do to get it, that's someone with a Jezebel spirit. However, a Jezebel spirit cannot reside without a Ahab spirit. So there has to be a member of leadership in the church that allows this to go on. And if not, guess what? That spirit moves on. So that's why it's important that our leaders in churches be covered. And I don't want to bash a minister or anything like that, but you have to be aware that some of them may have a Jezebel spirit. Mm-hmm. And so I learned a lot about the Jezebel spirit and wanted to shed light on it, but not so much to bash anybody. It was more so to educate and to become aware, but also to entertain. My books are to entertain, educate, and inspire. And also, one of the things I did realize that I wanted in my book that didn't happen in the Bible, Jezebel, there was no redemption for Queen Jezebel. Mm-hmm. There was no redemption for her. Mm-hmm. When you write Christian fiction or books, inspirational books, there should be some form of redemption. Now, I don't want to say you get redeemed and everything lives happily, you live happily ever after. That's not realistic. God forgives us, you know, and I'm sure if Queen Jezebel had humbled herself and asked for forgiveness, God would have forgiven her. However, there were still consequences for her actions. So we still have consequences. In my book, Jezebel,
Mhm.
she was redeemed, but there were consequences to her actions that she had to live with. And so that's basically the inspiration for Jezebel was Queen Jezebel in the Bible. And the thing about it was I wrote that book, gosh, it's been about 15, almost 20 years ago. There was never going to be a sequel, but she would not leave me alone. So it was what, 11 years later, I think, 11 or 12 years later, I got the idea for Jezebel's daughter. So I'm like, I remember in the Bible there was something about a daughter. So I went back to the Bible, and man, I found out her daughter was worse than her.
Ooh.
She killed her own family to, take the throne. And I'm
Mhm.
like, oh, wow. So, of course, Jezebel's daughter. And then there became Jezebel's revenge. And then there became Jezebel's redemption. But between revenge and redemption, I had to go back and do Jezebel the prequel. And the reason why is because for redemption, I needed readers to understand where all of this came from because it doesn't just appear, you know. We are affected by our surroundings and our environment growing up. We don't just suddenly decide to become mean. There's a reason why. There's a seed somewhere that was planted. So I needed to go back and talk about Jezebel's mom and how that seed was planted with her mom for her to become a modern day Jezebel.
Now, and Jack, I take a breath because one, I want to applaud you for opening up to share that you suffer from chronic panic disorder, and that you suffered from this for 27 years. And and I'm let me be just a fan now, and just a regular person too. Um, when we look at individuals who are celebrity personalities, is I guess the correct term now, is your personality. We don't, sometimes we forget that they're human beings also, and that they struggle with some of the same things that we struggle with as just a regular old person. And so to hear you talk about, but first of all, as I said, you've got 85 plus books that have already been published. I know you, so I know you're working on a gazillion more because you have your goal, but your goal is constantly changing too. You haven't said that to me, but it has to because new opportunities are coming and you want to work in that opportunity. So, but given all of that, it may be hard for the audience to understand how someone who is such a prolific writer could struggle with chronic panic disorder for almost 3 decades and still be successful. So help the audience to understand how you were able to continue to work your craft and be successful in this arena as far as work while you struggled with the person, which is Jackie.
Well, with me, I kept it a secret for so long because I was ashamed. And I'm not one for being a victim. And so I wasn't going to share that part of my life because I thought it would make me look weak and readers wouldn't, want to read me because people think you're crazy or whatever when you develop with panic disorder basically can come out of nowhere. It could also have a genetic disconnect, but it can just you can develop it. It can be learned behavior. I believe that mine was a little bit of both. I believe that it was a little bit of a genetic thing because there are other relatives that suffer from panic disorder in my family, but also because my grandmother taught me to fear, and those fears became irrational. Because what happens is your thought behavior changes when you learn something, and when your mind always takes you to the worst case scenario, you're training your mind to do that. So what happened, and I'm not blaming my grandmother by any means, let me be clear about this. My grandmother was wonderful, but she was afraid of a lot of things. She had a lot of fears, and I feel like she may have suffered a little bit from panic disorder. She would call it hyperventilating, because I remember my aunt having to calm her down and her blowing into a paper bag. So I believe she was having panic attacks.
Okay.
So, but they didn't talk about that back then.
Yeah.
And so for me, I didn't talk about it. I wrote, I would write, and I would kind of write my way through it. I have journals where I've written letters to God, like why I feel like I'm dying. And of course my brain would go to the worst case scenario. And it wasn't until I was getting my master's in psychology, and that's when I fully understood, because I actually, one of my first papers was on panic disorder, because I needed to understand and I needed to fight it. And so what I realized was that I had to retrain my brain. Now, let me backtrack a little bit before I even got to that point. There was a period a few years ago, around 2014, 15, 16, I kind of disappeared from the literary world. And it was because I was really struggling with panic disorder. I was having them so frequently. I would wake up in the middle of the night. I couldn't sit in traffic. I basically, my home was my safe space. Well, it developed into agoraphobia. I could not leave my home for a year. And I would respond to invites. Oh, I'm booked that day. I'm not going to be able to, make this event, but consider me for the next year. So basically I was lying to people. I couldn't go on tour. I couldn't tell my publishers. I couldn't tell my agent. I just could not cope. And so I shut down. And my doctor's like, you need help. And I didn't want to see a shrink, because I'm like, I'm not crazy, but I felt like I was crazy, because again, we would be in a car, and if traffic's like stopped, how rush hour, and you can't go anywhere, all of a sudden I would feel like I couldn't breathe, and I was claustrophobic, and I couldn't sit in traffic. My husband almost jumped out of the car one day. I couldn't go in the tunnel. We were, I think, going to Virginia Beach, and I'm like, stop the car, stop the car. And he's like, I can't stop here. And I almost jumped out. He had to grab me. And that's when I just shut down, didn't want to go anywhere, didn't want to travel. And I love to travel. On planes, I actually got off a plane one time. We were heading to a book event, and it was so many people. I'm like, they're trying to get on, I'm trying to get off. My husband was sitting there, he would not get off the plane. And I'm out there at that point, I'm like this and trying to get myself together. I thought he was going to come out, but he didn't. And that was the smartest thing for him not to do, was not come after me, because I wouldn't have gotten back on the plane. But because he was on the plane, the steward's like, we're going to have to close it. And I think she knew. So she started, she just kind of talked to me, and she's like, just breathe. And she's like, we're going to have to close the door soon. She goes, is that your husband? And I'm like, yes. She said, he's not going to get off the plane. And so I went, and I was like, just trembling. And I just started crying, because I'm like, God, I can't live this way. You gave me this gift of writing, but I can't, and I couldn't do it. So I wasn't writing during that time either.
Now, Jackie, we want to run around the kitchen island on that, because that's how I'm going to conclude our time today. The God box. I mean, that is such a powerful exercise to write something down, because we're taught to write the vision, make it plain. You put it in the box because I'm giving it over to God. And then a week or an hour later, I want to go back and get it. Okay.
But you don't want to, but you have to because you're worrying about it.
Exactly. And it's like, then I go mess with it. And then I take it back to him again. And just that back and forth, because like you said, it's a visual manifestation of how our mind works and the indecisiveness. And then to think, I'm taking it from the Father.
Exactly. But I actually have a testimony from a young author, Pat J. Walker. She's a great, wonderful author. But I actually told her about this. She was going through something one time. And so I told her about the God box. She actually came back and told me that there was one day she was just like, God just isn't hearing me, And so she went to just get everything out of the God box because she just felt like, you're just not hearing me. They were not there. And her God box was locked. They were not there.
And the box was locked.
And it was empty. Now, that's not my experience, but that was Pat J. Walker's experience. And if you ever have her on your show, she's a Christian and comedy author. She's wonderful. Definitely, she will tell you about that. When she told me, now that was running around the kitchen.
Yes, ma'am. Oh, Jackie, you don't have to try to reach her. We'll talk about it offline because it was locked and the requests were no longer there.
They were not there. God had taken them.
Well, Jackie, on that note, I know you got a few things in your God box. You're going to have to come back once those things have manifested themselves, and then we'll clue the audience in. It'll be our part 2, and then they can see how he has responded to your request in your God box. Thank you, Jackie.
Oh, and let me tell you, he already has this house. The new suspense books.
Okay.
Yes. So yes, when I tell you yes, and there's so much more I could tell you, but I'm not at liberty to tell you yet. But yes, we'll talk soon.
Well, guys, let me just say this. If I'm going to do me a God box. Now, you've heard her say this house, and can I say this, Jackie? Jackie, this is a new house for Jackie. She's been there not quite too much yet. This is going to air later. So, when I'm interviewing her, she's been there a month. And then she's saying this suspense, because I knew about the suspense, but I wasn't able to tell it, but she can tell it, that those are things that she put in her God box. So the God box works. It's an exercise of our faith in real time, real life. So next time, we'll be hopping back on again because I got to let them know about the new book that's coming. And then as Jackie said, we're going to do a God box party. You heard it here. So just know in the future, you have to tell people what that means. But we're going to do a God box party because I think that's something that people will really benefit from. And we need to hear good news and sharing the good news of God. So thank you again, Jackie.
Thank you for listening to Talk with TAS with Dr. Teresa A. Smith. For more information on this show and Dr. TAS, you should visit AskDrTAS.com. That's AskDrTAS.com. Talk with TAS is a production of DQ Consulting, LLC. Dr. Teresa Smith, executive producer.